Hello, everyone, to another amazing episode of Coffee with Gable. With me is Imran, who is the COO of Postclick, Instapage, who's one of my favorite people, basically. I'm so excited to have you here joining us. So I'll start with a very quick question on if you can describe a little bit about your role, about Postclick, Instapage, and everything, just for our audience to get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, you bet. Super excited to be here, and thanks for letting me know I'm one of your favorite people. That's that's always nice. I'm imagining like if we had speed dials anymore, that I'd made it to the
I'll be
top.
there. You'll be there. Top 10.
Yeah, it's so excited to be here, and the topic today is something that I'm very passionate about. Post click Instapage. We've got two brands, and we started out about 9 years ago with Instapage, which is a landing page builder for the SMB mid-market space. We took everything that we learned within Instapage and evolved in 2020 and built out PostClick, which is a conversion platform for a lot of our clients out there. We've got over 4,000 brands that kind of work with us across the two portfolios, and super excited to kind of help clients with conversion, with landing page optimization, and to tell a better story.
Amazing. Um, Question. So as both you and I know, when we first started talking, we talked a lot about how Postlick and Instapage had very much an office-based culture. You had a lot of offices, people coming day to day. That's basically by definition. Um, Now it's very different. But if you could share a little bit about what it was before, how you transformed it, or what indicated that you need to transform, and how is it now?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, we're Bay Area based, and I think a lot of folks, when they think about a startup, you think about that in-office culture that you get at a startup, right? Like you get the ping pong tables, you get the couches, you get the whiteboards, you get the collaboration, and some of that secret sauce came from actually being in a space together. And when the pandemic hit, that changed everything, right? Like there was a lot of uncertainty, there was a lot of unknown, and we weren't even really sure of like what's the impact on productivity, connectivity, how do we continue to operate in that model. And I think the pandemic kind of forced us to rethink about the way we work and where we work, right? And so what started off as a very in-office, we only hired in the Bay Area because folks were coming into the office. We very quickly kind of moved to a more hub and spoke model, and we evolved from that piece, right? So we had hubs. We launched a second hub in Austin, Texas, in the U.S. We always had hubs in Romania and Poland. That's where a lot of our development and customer success orgs sit today. And we were like, okay, this is the natural evolution, hub and spoke. From there, we kind of moved to, hey, there's a lot of talent that's like everywhere now, right? And folks during the pandemic started migrating out of like big metropolises. A lot of folks returned home. You saw urban sprawl take place, and so that kind of led us into like we should be where the talent is, and that's really everywhere. And we kind of moved into beyond like a hub and spoke model, and moved into sort of a remote culture. And to be honest, at this point, it's hard to think about even being back in an office for us, right? Like we're so far removed from that,
Wow,
and have seen productivity, really take off in connectivity as well.
that's pretty incredible. Just the transformation, like you said, that you cannot even imagine going back in a sense. But I wanted to to double click on 2 points that you made, especially around productivity and connection, or human connection, right? Which I know is very important, of course, to you, but for any company that is doing this transformation. So I'm wondering how does your vision on this has changed, or how do you measure this as well has changed?
Yeah, completely. I think, let me start with productivity. I think that um, in the beginning, we didn't know there was a lot of folks on our team that had never worked in a remote culture, right? I I think I was really fortunate when I was at Oracle Marketing Cloud. There was a lot of flexibility, right? So we would be in the office 2 days a week. Most of the time, I'd be at an airport, I think, flying to clients and traveling that way. So I was very used to kind of a remote culture and self-discipline and knowing what needs to be done. And I think Instapage Postclick is a very results-driven organization, and that's really helpful, right? We use objectives and key results to really drive the business forward and plan for each quarter. And so I think every person in our organization has a mission that kind of ties into the bigger goals of the organization. So it was a good starting point for us. With productivity, I think we saw the inverse where people didn't know how to stop working, right? I think for a lot of folks, um, when they started working from home, they were just working all the time, right? Like they were responding to things. They would maybe stop at some point, eat, then get back in front of their laptops. And I saw it kind of go the other way. And we saw some of this with work-life balance statistics. And as we surveyed folks and, tried to figure out what was important, you saw a lot of sort of burnout, not drawing visual lines and things like that. In fact, people always joke like I'm typically pretty dressed up even when I work from home. I wear a blazer most of the time, and for me, this is my ritual. When I take it off, I'm done work. Right? There's a visual separation for me between my work life and my home life, which is hard to do. So productivity, I think, kind of went the other way, where we were too engrossed and too connected and too responsive, and tools like Slack always keep you on. So I think we had to find a balance. It was easy to see because our OKRs were still being delivered on, and as an organization, we were moving forward. So we saw that productivity was taking place. Um, Connectivity is different, right? Like human connection, and I think especially in the last 2 years, all of us have really longed for that human connection, but we've also recognized that we don't want to be in an office 5 days a week to achieve that. So then you really break that down into what does that mean, right? Like, what does connection mean? Is it working side by side in the same space for 8 hours and not interacting? Or is it actually meaningful interactions with folks where you sort of curate conversation? And for us, it was more the latter, right? That was important. It was important to get together, to see each other, but it wasn't necessarily important that we needed to be in the same space to work. Um, in fact, like some folks might think that they're actually more productive when they're not around other people anymore, right? Because they're so heads down, focused on something as a whole. So, understanding the difference was really important for us, Liza. That it wasn't human connection in the sense of I need to be in a space 5 days a week. It was human connection that I miss organic conversations. I miss doing things with my friends, and learning who the new people are, and being connected to a vision that way.
And I 100% agree. I think that's a lot of what we see all across is that the purpose of coming to a space together has changed. It's not just for the sake of going outside of your home. It depends, right? Like you will have those things all the time. That's, I would say, like even a given. But the purpose of coming is not to be more effective there. It's to collaborate, to brainstorm, to have those organic connections that you couldn't have in this like sharp Zoom conversations that you
Sure.
just do for work. So I think that's such a big change, and we see this all the time. And I'm wondering, how are you doing? Like, how are you thinking about this? How to in terms of how to instill this for employees? Is it, do you do this organically or purposefully in terms of, okay, these are the things that we think that will help you feel connected? How do you go about like creating this connection or connectivity experience with intention, I would say?
Yeah, I think like purpose and mission are really important. I think for a lot of our organization, they understand the purpose and vision, right? Like we bring it back to our OKRs every quarter, right? And we're sort of connected into like these 5 objectives that folks look into. And then we've got some really, really strong leaders that I'm really, really proud of. And they do a really great job of bringing their teams together, right? And I'll speak to like our sales team leader here, because I think he does a phenomenal job of actually instilling this within his team, and we see it in the data as well. So our chief revenue officer, Steve, you notice that there's a lot of the sales team that actually comes into Gable offices today. Um, and it's no mistake that we see some of the highest levels of engagement on a team within that sales org, as well. And I think a
Mhm.
lot of success is like actually coming in, talking to each other, talking through opportunities. It doesn't even need to be structured in the sense of like, here's the meetings that I need to have to meet with you, but in the sense of like, we're together, we're working collaboratively with each other. So a lot of the leaders, as to answer your question, do a good job of fostering that, and looking for ways that we can connect each other.
Amazing. I think that's a really good way, in a sense, to empower the leaders in the organization to be responsible for their org, to create those meaningful connections, and just assuming that this will happen organically, because it doesn't, I would say, or
Yeah.
you need to have one structured structure in place. I think so, at least. And I'm wondering, how are you measuring the success of this? Basically, what
Yeah.
are the you're looking for, or anything related to that?
I think it's, I was reading a really great book, by Daniel Pink recently, which talked about like the importance of recess, right? When we're at school. And I don't know if you remember recess when you were in school, right? But it was like this unstructured time that everybody had to take, it'd be 15 minutes, etc., in between a lunch, kind of break. But they talk about how important recess was to actually learning, right? And when you took a break and actually came back to something, you were actually a lot more engaged, into something. So I do think like it's important that you even structure unstructured time, as silly as that sounds, right? Like there needs to be, like almost a top down, like this is important to us, right? It's important to us that you actually make time to have human connection in a remote workforce. Um, so that's what you're seeing with a lot of our leadership, right? Kind of saying it is important. We're also trying to get into a Gable office at least once a week. And we try to lead by example and ask a lot of our leaders to go in, right? And so if anybody wants to come in, they jump on, right? We use like Slack integrations and things like that. That the platform's really helpful for us of letting people know, hey, we're going into this office at this time. Let's make it happen. Let's have different teams. I personally, I reach out to folks that I don't necessarily see all the time and say, hey, I'd love to buy you lunch. I'd love to connect with you. Let's work across, this day at this time.
That's incredible. And do you see, how does it, in terms of, look, I would say you've been using Gable for quite some time, and in general, you've been already, as you mentioned yourself, you don't even know how it's going to be like coming back to an office. But in general, how do you see that in terms of employee engagement over time, or collaboration, or even productivity in that sense? How do they come across? How they stabilize or be measured as part of
Yeah.
the organization?
Well, first and foremost, I think our attractiveness from an employment standpoint has actually increased because we do have a remote culture.
Mhm.
Um, I've actually talked to candidates that have said the reason they're leaving is their companies are saying come back in full time, right? And there isn't that level of flexibility. So I think that's, a first and foremost helping us kind of set ourselves apart, in general. I think the individual kind of core base of our folks, um, it's established, right? And I think that as new people also come in, they want to know who they're working with, and they want to connect with people that they're working with. Um, it's funny, before we got engaged with Gable, we did try alternative, remote working solutions, right? Like we would go into a WeWork office and things like that. But the big distinction there, Liza, is like I don't think our employee base felt very empowered to say, "Hey, I'm going to be at this particular WeWork. I'll meet you there. Why don't you come join me?" Right? And kind of shifting to Gable, where the company is kind of taking care of that. It's less of a costing. It's more of a, hey, our company wants us to get together, right? Our company wants us to put this first, just like a teacher kind of structuring recess for folks. A teacher seldom says, here's what I want you to do at recess, but they actually put the recess together, right? And so I see it kind of like in that same way. And, I think going from recess in the classroom to the workforce, I actually shifted recess to reset, right? Because I think you need these opportunities to reset throughout the day.
I love it. And what about like new employees? You mentioned that, of course, you hired a lot, and this is an amazing benefit in that sense, and also the fact that, as you mentioned, remote first culture.
Yeah.
Do you craft like experiences for new hires, or how do you get them involved and emerge as part of their groups, the entire company, and things like that?
Yeah, we have a really great onboarding process. I do want to say that, and we spent a lot of time working on our onboarding process and revamping it. So a really, really big shout out to our people function for looking into that. Um, while the market was fluctuating really drastically, I think from a employee churn standpoint. And, we've seen like the great resignation, the great reshuffle, as you've heard about it. Um, a few of the areas that really became meaningful for folks and, quoted on why they stay at a company is because they have a really great onboarding process. They have a really clear understanding of growth and what that means to them, and there's a lot of flexibility. And I think the third one has really come in recent years. I think post pandemic of having that flexibility, work life kind of balance. And so we took onboarding really seriously. And that's not just onboarding you onto your role, but that's
Yeah.
onboarding you onto our culture, right? And how we work and where we work and how we connect. And so Gable's a part of that, right? And so we get everybody set up on that and talk about the importance of creating connection and going in and reaching out to people and leveraging opportunities to do that.
And basically, you create this open conversation, in a sense, for new hires to reach out and to
Yeah,
empower to do that as a starting point, right? Because I think that's the
yeah,
and before people want to feel part of something, right? Uh,
absolutely. Yeah, and I think people, just one thing I'll add to that is like, I think people want to make that evolution on their own. I think if we were very prescriptive and did it in a way like that, you need to do this and this is essential, I think it wouldn't work as well for us as an organization. Nor would we be living by the philosophy that's kind of made us successful, right? I think
yeah,
um, so that's a really important piece of it.
I think now it's much better.
Okay, awesome.
Yes.
What are the chances of that?
What are the chances of that? Well, it's fine. That's no worries at all. Can
I
you?
was I was sharing right before we kicked off this concept of like emotional resilience, and my entire day is filled with just highs and lows and highs and lows and
So
what's
funny.
the humor in it. So um, happy we're back. Hopefully we didn't lose too many people, but
No worries, no worries. And it's so funny that you say emotional resilience. I literally said it. I had a meeting with someone yesterday, and they asked me about like, oh, how is it working for us, like working in a startup? I'm sure you feel the same. It's just this roller coaster. Like 1 hour, everything is amazing. The other, it's like, okay, how do we figure this out? Another hour. So it's the emotional roller coaster is spot on. So
yeah,
this is part of it.
this
Um,
is it's part of the fun. Yeah,
I agree. I agree. But as you see, we came out of it much better and more resilient. So
Yeah,
that's
absolutely. Yeah. And people don't know this, but we've switched sides as well. So something
you
great
see.
happened on the screen.
So, to keep people on edge. Um, so let's dive right in. So I think in general, one of the things that is very interesting is also in terms of how do you measure the effectiveness, in a sense, of your new workplace strategy, and how do you see this iterating, in a sense, where because you've done a lot of as this is basically again like a new product in my view, right? And how do you iterate on your workplace strategy? What have you done to change or increments or in general? Yes.
Yeah. And the word like strategy is like the correct one to say, because I think um, there where our workforce is and how we sort of connect with folks is really strategic for us, right? And I think we do boast about like being a very people first organization, and I think um, as part of that, like we have to meet people where they are, right? And I think being strategic in this nature and how we evolve from in office to hub and spoke to remote capabilities has kind of shown a little bit of that evolution. And I think your question really is around like what's next, right? Like what's next for us, and how do we still meet folks where they want to be. And
Mhm.
I think, we've talked about this a lot. Like, I think work has changed. I think how we work has changed. I think why we work has changed. And, I think part of that is like connecting to the balance of our individual workforce, right? And I think what we're probably going to see next is this notion of like the 8 or 9 hour day, and when that takes place change, right? Quite drastically as we sort of evolve our strategy on things. And I think some of that needs to be met with when the customer is available. But I think generally that's evolving. That's evolving for us as a whole, as an organization. I think we're going to continue to look for opportunities to um, enter new markets, look for new backgrounds. So I think one of the advantages of as we've moved into hiring anywhere, we've got a pretty big workforce now starting to take shape in Latin America, and we never had that before, right? That wouldn't have been possible before. And I think as you bring in sort of new regions and you go live, it only helps our diversity in our culture, right? It only helps bring different ideas. And you'll see that in our product and services and the way we think about problems and the way we interact with our customers. So I see a lot of advantage that kind of ties into our workforce being where it is.
And how did you? So one, I 100% agree that having diverse people from so many diverse backgrounds,
Mhm.
cultures, um, and in general ideas only contributes to a better company and a better product.
Yeah.
Um, Wondering if you see challenges arising from it, from what your culture used to be and how is it now, and how do you know evolve your culture around that. I think this is not an easy task to do as you hire agnostically.
It's really tough, right? And I'm super passionate about culture, as you know, and we have a cultural committee here, right, at Instapage Postclick, and um, I was chairing that for some time, and I talk about like the four different types of organizational culture, and we're kind of in this like a lot of organizations really connect with a family culture. And if you think about most businesses, up until about 70 years ago, a lot of businesses were a family, right? They were passed down. So it generally tends to be the predominant culture that you want to connect with. I think Instapage and PostClick to me is more of a teammate kind of driven culture, right? Less about family, more about being teammates. And if you think about like the sports analogy, you count on the folks that are on your team, right? Each of them serves a different purpose. from time to time, people get traded. From time to time, people move on, right? But you're in it to win championships, and you don't want to really let your team down. And so that's a much more evolved culture for us versus just a family dynamic culture where it's hard to let go of that uncle that does nothing, right? We all have that. Shows up to the barbecues on Sunday and just eats and stuff. But, you can't move away. You can't separate from family. And I think our culture's evolving, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think what we had before was great, and I think as we build on that, it's only going to evolve to something better. I don't think culture is a static place in time or a snapshot in time. I think it's an evolving, living kind of organism, and as your workforce changes, it evolves and changes. And I'm sure that we've got some microcultures in there as well. And as long as I think the whole kind of connects with the purpose, and I think that's fine.
I just love the analogy of the uncle. I'm definitely going to. It's amazing, but that's really true, right? Because that's the reason why you are, where you're hiring everywhere, where you are basing your choices based on talent and contribution, and regardless of status or this uncle or anything like that, right? It's much
Yeah,
more on what you can bring to the table. It doesn't matter where you came from. It's what you can do in that sense. And I wouldn't be able to do what I do without this, if that makes sense, right? So I 100% agree with you on that. Um, I'm wondering, like, from your experience, or like, it would be like, I would say my final question, what would be your advice for companies that now are in this moment, right? A lot of the companies that we partner with are dealing with the same challenges of it. How do you create a culture and a process also with as part of a distributed workforce? What would be your guides of starting out doing something like that?
yeah. Well, I think the first is start. Start thinking. If you're not thinking about like what a distributed culture looks like, start thinking about it. Right. I think um, I feel really privileged to be in like the tech sector, which tends to be very um, future forward and looking at the trends and adopting it. But I know that a remote culture isn't for every type of organization or every job we serve, right? And so I think, first assess if it's applicable to you, right? And why is it applicable? Um, and then, really tap into like what's important for your workforce. I think we do a good job of listening, but I think when we started having a two-way conversation, it became a lot better for us, right? As an organization, using ENPS, different surveys, talking about work-life balance. I talked about OKRs here. One of our objectives out of the five is balance, right?
Wow.
And we pretty much put it out there. And so that's a big statement for us, right? Of this is one of the top five things as a company we want to focus in on, employee balance, and all of these initiatives like Gable and others came from that, because we put it out there as this is really important to us. I think so. My second bit of advice is make it important, right? It's not going to get done unless you make it important, and it has to be important at all levels of the organization. Um, and the third is, I think it's easy to say like diversity is really important and brings out new ideas. There's tons of statistics about it, and great thought leadership on it. It's another thing to really believe it, right? And I think here we really believe it. We really believe that our teams, remotely in the U.S. or around the world, make us better. Build a better product, allow us to service customers a lot better, make us more empathetic and connected. And so, we live by all of those things, um, in general.
That's incredible. And I think not only just believing in that, but also implementing that. That's a really that's the hardest part, and I think you're doing an incredible job there. Um, Thank you so much. Thank you for incredible call. Ups and downs of a startup. Uh,
Memorable. The dramatic pause must have been really
keeps everyone
dramatic.
on switch, so we keep it
Yeah.
spicy here. Thank you so much. And thank you for everyone who joined and listened. And we'll see you in the next Coffee with Gable.
So,
Bye. Thank
bye.
you.